When Mark discovers his wife Molly's affair, his world shatters. Fueled by anger and betrayal, he meticulously plans his revenge, gathering evidence and preparing for a confrontation that will end their marriage. But as the truth unfolds, Mark learns that the web of deception is more tangled than he imagined. Molly's attempts to explain her choices come too late, and a tragic twist of fate leaves Mark reeling with questions, regret, and a void he can't fill. As he struggles to move forward, Mark must navigate the complexities of love, loss, and the haunting reality that sometimes, even justice comes with unbearable consequences. The soft hum of the coffee machine was the only sound in the house that morning. I stood at the counter, waiting for the pot to fill, replaying the mental to-do list for the day. Molly was upstairs, getting ready for work, and the kids were still asleep, blissfully unaware of the storm about to descend on their lives. It was an ordinary morning until her phone buzzed on the counter beside me. My eyes flicked toward the screen out of habit, expecting an email or maybe a reminder notification. What I saw instead turned my blood cold. "Can't wait to see you tonight, gorgeous." The words stared back at me, bold and taunting. The sender's name was simply Aaron. My hand froze mid-reach for my mug, trembling as the full weight of what I'd just read sank in. For a moment, I convinced myself it was a misunderstanding, a friend, maybe, or some kind of spam. But the heart emoji, the intimacy of the words, it didn't take a genius to figure it out. I swallowed hard, a knot tightening in my chest. I knew I shouldn't, but curiosity and pain drove me to unlock her phone. The passcode was no mystery, her birth date, the same as always. My fingers felt clumsy as I swiped to her messages. The thread with Aaron was right at the top. I tapped it open. What followed was a barrage of messages that confirmed my worst fears. Dinner reservations. Flirty exchanges. Explicit promises. My stomach churned as I read them, each line cutting deeper than the last. She'd told me she was working late tonight. Instead, she was meeting him. I set the phone down carefully, afraid I might hurl it across the room if I wasn't careful. My first instinct was to storm upstairs, confront her, demand answers. But something held me back, a cold, calculating voice in the back of my mind whispering, "Don't let her know you know." Not yet. I couldn't react in the heat of the moment. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was a deception so deep that it threatened to unravel everything we'd built together. I needed time. Time to think, time to plan, time to understand how the woman I loved could do this to me. Molly came downstairs a few minutes later, all smiles, her blonde hair falling in loose waves over her shoulders. She wore the red blouse I'd always complimented, the one that brought out the brightness in her eyes. "Good morning," she said, breezing past me to grab her coffee. Her phone was back in her hand before I could blink. "Morning," I replied, forcing my voice to sound normal. "Big day at work?" "Always is," she said with a laugh, sipping her coffee. "You?" Same old," I said, trying to keep my tone light. But my heart was pounding in my chest, my hands gripping the edge of the counter to steady myself. She didn't notice. Of course, she didn't notice. Why would she? She thought her secrets were safe. That night, while Molly claimed to be working late, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the flickering light of the TV without really seeing it. I'd spent the entire day on edge, my mind racing through every possibility, every scenario. How long had this been going on? Who was Aaron? And why the hell hadn't I seen this coming? I tried to remember the last time we'd been truly happy together, the last time I'd looked at her and seen the woman I married. Maybe it was when we took the kids to the lake last summer. Or maybe it was even further back, before the little cracks in our relationship had started to form. When had those cracks turned into chasms? The sound of her car pulling into the driveway jolted me out of my thoughts. I sat perfectly still, waiting as she unlocked the front door and stepped inside. She looked exhausted, her makeup slightly smudged, but she was smiling, a soft, content smile that twisted the knife in my chest even deeper. "Long day?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. "You have no idea," she said with a sigh, dropping her bag on the floor. "I'm going to take a quick shower." I nodded, watching as she disappeared up the stairs. My hands clenched into fists. My resolve hardened. I wasn't going to let this go. But I wasn't going to confront her yet either. I needed proof, irrefutable proof that she couldn't talk her way out of. The next morning, while she showered, I took her phone again. It was easy, too easy. She trusted me too much to think I'd ever invade her privacy. But trust was a two-way street, and she'd already shattered hers. I downloaded an app to clone her messages to my own phone. Every text she sent, every call she made, every notification she received, I'd see it all. It felt like an invasion of privacy, but the pain in my chest drowned out the guilt. If she was cheating, I needed to know. Over the next few days, the pieces began to fall into place. Aaron wasn't just some passing fling. He was a coworker, someone she saw regularly. Their texts were frequent, filled with inside jokes, shared memories, and promises of more. Each message was a dagger to my heart, but I forced myself to read them all. She talked about me sometimes. About how distant I'd been, how preoccupied. How she felt neglected and unappreciated. It was like watching someone write the story of our marriage's demise, line by line, and blaming me for every crack in the foundation. I wanted to scream at her, shake her, demand to know how she could do this. But I didn't. Instead, I documented everything. Screenshots, photos, copies of every damning message. I compiled a folder so full of evidence that even the best liar in the world couldn't deny it. This wasn't just about confronting her anymore. It was about preparing for the aftermath. About protecting myself, my kids, and the life we'd built together. And maybe, just maybe, it was about revenge. But revenge would have to wait. First, I needed the perfect moment to expose her lies. And that moment was coming soon. The following days were a blur of quiet observation and careful planning. Molly went about her life as if nothing had changed, blissfully unaware that her every move was being tracked. She laughed with the kids, kissed me goodbye before heading to work, and sent those vile, deceitful texts to Aaron in between. Each message tightened the coil of anger in my chest. Yet, I played my part perfectly, never giving her a reason to suspect. I was the same husband she thought she knew, reliable, predictable, and ignorant. But beneath the surface, I was plotting her downfall. I started by digging deeper into her digital footprint. My cloning app gave me access to her emails, calendar, and even her photos. That's where I found the real treasure trove: selfies with Aaron, hotel receipts, and a video of them laughing over dinner in what looked like a private suite. I stared at the images for what felt like hours, my stomach twisting. The betrayal was so much more real now. It wasn't just words, it was their bodies, their smiles, their shared intimacy. I slammed my laptop shut, my jaw clenched so tightly it hurt. It was no longer a question of if I would confront her, but how. One night, after she went to bed, I sat in the living room with a glass of whiskey in hand. My thoughts raced as I stared at the folder of evidence on my laptop. There was no coming back from this. Once I opened Pandora's box, our lives would never be the same. But I couldn't delay any longer. Molly had a work trip planned that weekend, a trip I now knew wasn't work-related at all. Aaron was going with her. They'd booked a boutique hotel in the city, complete with couples spa packages. The level of betrayal was almost laughable. I decided to follow them. I didn't know what I would do when I got there, but I had to see it with my own eyes. Call it masochism or closure, either way, I needed to confront the truth. The morning of her trip, Molly was practically glowing. She hummed as she packed her suitcase, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. Don't forget to call the kids before bed, I said, leaning against the doorway to our bedroom. Of course, she replied with a bright smile, zipping up her bag. I'll miss you guys. I fought the urge to scoff. Have a good trip. She kissed me on the cheek, and for the first time in years, I felt nothing. Not love, not warmth, just emptiness. As soon as her car disappeared down the driveway, I sprang into action. I'd taken the liberty of planting a GPS tracker on her car the night before. Watching her little blip move toward the city on my phone gave me a grim sense of satisfaction. She was heading straight to the hotel, just as I predicted. I followed at a safe distance, my hands gripping the wheel tightly. My mind raced with possibilities. What if I confronted them in the middle of their romantic dinner? What if I barged into their hotel room? What if I just let them see me, a silent specter haunting their illicit affair? By the time I reached the hotel, I still didn't have a plan. I parked across the street, watching from the shadows as Molly stepped out of her car, her smile radiant as Aaron greeted her. They embraced, his hand lingering on her waist in a way that made my blood boil. I grabbed my phone and snapped a few photos through the windshield. Evidence, I reminded myself. This wasn't about anger, it was about building an airtight case. That evening, as they dined in the hotel's upscale restaurant, I found a corner table where I could observe them without being seen. The waiter asked if I wanted to order, but I waved him off. My appetite was long gone. Molly looked happier than I'd seen her in years. She laughed freely, her hand resting on Aaron's as they shared a bottle of wine. The sight was a cruel mockery of everything we once had. She had no idea I was there, watching her every move. I snapped more photos, my jaw clenched so tightly it ached. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to storm over and rip her world apart. But I didn't. Not yet. When they left the restaurant, I followed them discreetly back to their room. They disappeared inside, and I stood in the hallway, staring at the closed door. My fists tightened, my breath coming in short, shallow bursts. I could feel the rage bubbling beneath the surface, but I forced myself to stay calm. I wasn't ready to confront her. Not here, not like this. I had bigger plans. The next morning, Molly returned home, radiating the same contentment she'd left with. If she noticed my unusually quiet demeanor, she didn't say anything. She unpacked her bag, kissed the kids, and went about her day as if nothing had happened. Meanwhile, I spent the day preparing for the confrontation. I printed out the photos, compiled the texts, and organized every shred of evidence into a neatly labeled folder. I even recorded a short video on my phone, detailing the events of the weekend. If Molly tried to twist the narrative, I would have everything I needed to set the record straight. That night, as she slept soundly beside me, I stared at the folder on my nightstand. Tomorrow, I would rip her lies apart. Tomorrow, the truth would come crashing down around her. And tomorrow, our lives would change forever. The morning dawned cold and gray, fitting for what I was about to do. I'd hardly slept the night before, my mind running over every possible outcome, every word I would say. The folder sat on the kitchen counter, thick with evidence that would unravel the life Molly had so carefully constructed. She came down the stairs dressed for the office, looking as radiant as ever. She smiled as she poured herself a cup of coffee, utterly unaware of the storm about to break. "You're up early," she said, sipping her drink. "I couldn't sleep," I replied, my tone even. "Everything okay?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. It was almost laughable, her concern. "Not really," I said, sliding the folder across the counter toward her. "We need to talk." Her brows knit together as she looked at the folder. "What's this?" "Open it," I said, crossing my arms and leaning against the counter. She hesitated, her fingers brushing over the edge of the folder. Then, with a slight shrug, she flipped it open. Her expression shifted almost instantly, from confusion to shock to panic. The photos were on top. Clear, high-resolution images of her with Aaron, laughing together, holding hands, the kiss outside the hotel. Her hands trembled as she shuffled through them, revealing screenshots of their messages and copies of the hotel receipts. The silence was deafening, broken only by the faint rustle of paper. What is this?" she stammered, her voice shaky. "You tell me," I said coldly. She looked up at me, her eyes wide, glistening with tears. "It's not what it looks like." "Don't," I snapped, my voice sharp enough to make her flinch. "Don't insult me by lying. I know everything, Molly. The texts, the dinners, the hotel stays. You've been cheating on me with Aaron, and I want to know how long it's been going on." She opened her mouth, then closed it, her gaze dropping to the floor. I don't know," she finally whispered. "You don't know?" I said, my voice rising. "You don't know how long you've been betraying me? What kind of answer is that?" Her tears spilled over, her shoulders shaking. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I never meant to hurt you." I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and cold. "You never meant to hurt me? That's rich. Every time you lied to my face, every time you left this house to be with him, you made a choice. Don't pretend this was an accident." She buried her face in her hands, her sobs muffled. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then the anger surged again, washing away any trace of pity. "Why, Molly?" I demanded. "Why him? Why now?" She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. "I don't know," she said again. I felt neglected. Lonely. Like we'd lost something. I stared at her, my jaw tightening. "So, instead of talking to me, you decided to run to him? Do you have any idea what you've done to this family?" "I was stupid," she said, her voice breaking. I thought I could handle it. That it would make me feel better." "Well, did it?" I asked, my tone venomous. "Did it make you feel better, Molly? Was it worth destroying our marriage?" She didn't answer, her silence more damning than any admission. The kids were at school, blissfully unaware of the chaos unfolding at home. Molly sat at the table, her head in her hands, while I paced the room, too restless to sit. The silence stretched between us, heavy and oppressive. "What happens now?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm filing for divorce," I said flatly. "I've already spoken to a lawyer. You'll hear from her soon." Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with panic. "No," she said, her voice trembling. "Please, Mark. Don't do this. We can fix this." "Fix this?" I said, incredulous. "There's nothing left to fix, Molly. You killed it." She reached for my hand, but I pulled away, the sight of her touch repulsive. "I'll do anything," she said desperately. "Counseling, therapy, whatever it takes. Just please, don't give up on us." "It's too late for that," I said coldly. "You gave up on us the moment you chose him." Her sobs grew louder, but I felt nothing. No sympathy, no compassion. Just a hollow ache where love used to be. Later that afternoon, I packed a bag and left the house. I couldn't stand to be under the same roof as her, not after everything. I checked into a hotel, needing space to clear my head and figure out my next move. The kids would be the hardest part. They adored their mother, and the thought of shattering their world was unbearable. But they deserved the truth, or at least as much of it as they could handle. As I lay on the stiff hotel bed that night, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, I felt the weight of it all pressing down on me. My marriage was over. The life I'd built, the future I'd envisioned, it was gone, torn apart by her lies. But amidst the grief and anger, there was a flicker of resolve. I would get through this. For myself. For my kids. And if Molly thought she could walk away unscathed, she was sorely mistaken. The battle was just beginning. Days passed, each one heavier than the last. Molly moved out of the house after our initial confrontation, but the silence she left behind was oppressive. The kids asked questions, too many questions, about why their mom was staying somewhere else. I gave them vague answers about grown-up problems, but they weren't satisfied. How could they be? I wasn't satisfied either. The divorce process moved forward at a steady clip. My lawyer assured me I had the upper hand, given the evidence I provided and Molly's clear fault in the breakdown of our marriage. She told me I could expect to keep the house, full custody of the kids, and a significant chunk of our assets. On paper, I was winning. But in reality, I felt hollow. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I got the call. The kids were at school, and I was working from home, trying to keep myself distracted with the mundane tasks of the day. My phone buzzed on the desk, and I almost ignored it, thinking it was another call from the lawyer or some telemarketer. But it wasn't. "Mr. Williams," the voice on the other end said. It was a woman, calm and professional. "Yes, this is Mark," I replied, already feeling a strange sense of foreboding. "This is Detective Harris with the City Police Department," she said. "I'm afraid I have some difficult news." My chest tightened. "What is it?" She hesitated, just long enough for my stomach to drop. "It's about your wife, Molly. She was involved in a car accident earlier today." I froze, my breath caught in my throat. "Is she?" "She didn't make it," the detective said gently. "We're still investigating the cause, but it appears she lost control of her vehicle on the highway. I'm so sorry for your loss." The words hit me like a freight train. My ears rang, my vision blurred. Molly was gone. Dead. The woman who had betrayed me, who had torn our family apart, was now a memory. The detective asked if I could come down to the station to provide some information and help identify personal items from the wreckage. I agreed numbly, hanging up the phone and staring at the wall. The house felt colder than ever. At the station, they showed me her belongings, a broken phone, a wallet, and a small locket I'd given her on our 10th anniversary. It was scratched and bent, but the photo of us inside was still intact. My chest ached as I looked at it, the weight of everything we'd lost pressing down on me. They told me the accident was likely caused by a moment of distraction. Witnesses said she'd been speeding, weaving between cars, as though she was in a hurry to get somewhere. Or maybe running away from something. Breaking the news to the kids was the hardest thing I'd ever done. Emma and Jack were too young to fully grasp what was happening, but old enough to feel the sting of it. They cried for hours, and I held them, trying to find the right words to comfort them while grappling with my own storm of emotions. I wanted to feel relief. Some dark, twisted part of me thought I should feel free now that Molly was out of the picture. But instead, I felt only guilt. Crushing, suffocating guilt. Had I driven her to this? Had my confrontation, my coldness, pushed her to the edge? Had I been too focused on revenge to see the cracks in her that went deeper than I realized? A few weeks later, as I was cleaning out her things, I found her journal tucked away in the back of her closet. I shouldn't have read it, but I did. Each page was a window into her unraveling mind, a tangled web of guilt, regret, and despair. She wrote about Aaron, how the affair had started as an escape but quickly became something she couldn't control. She wrote about the confrontation, how she knew she deserved my anger but couldn't face the consequences. She wrote about the kids, how much she loved them, how much she hated herself for what she'd done to our family. And then, on the last page, she wrote about me. I still love Mark. I've always loved him. But I've destroyed everything. I can't fix this. I can't fix me. He deserves better than what I've become. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. For all her faults, for all her betrayal, Molly had been human, flawed, broken, and desperately trying to find her way. I had been so consumed with anger that I never stopped to see the pain she was carrying. Months later, the house was still quiet, but it wasn't the same silence as before. It was heavier now, filled with unspoken words and unfinished goodbyes. The kids adjusted as best as they could, but the void Molly left was impossible to fill. I thought about her often, too often. About the good times we shared, about the mistakes we both made. About the life we could have had if things had been different. In the end, there was no victory, no justice, no closure. Just an empty house, 2 grieving children, and a man haunted by what could never be undone. And perhaps, that was the cruelest punishment of all. The days after Molly's death were a blur of grief and numbness. The kids cried themselves to sleep every night, their young hearts unable to process the loss. I kept moving, doing what needed to be done, handling funeral arrangements, settling her estate, and trying to provide some semblance of normalcy for Emma and Jack. But inside, I was unraveling. Molly's betrayal still stung, even in death. Her affair with Aaron had been the catalyst for the destruction of our marriage, yet her sudden absence left a void I didn't know how to fill. I hated her for what she did, but I hated myself even more for still loving her. I told myself I was managing. I told myself I was doing fine. But the truth was, I was drowning. A month after the funeral, I received an unexpected letter in the mail. The envelope was plain, with no return address, but my name was scrawled across the front in Molly's familiar handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it, the weight of her final words pressing down on me before I even read them. Mark. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I don't know how to begin to apologize for the pain I've caused you. I never meant for things to spiral the way they did, but that's no excuse. I let you down, I let our family down, and I'll carry that guilt with me forever. You deserve answers, even if they come too late. The affair with Aaron started as a distraction, a way to feel something when I felt so empty. But it wasn't love, Mark. It was never love. The only man I've ever loved is you. I was planning to tell you everything the night I died. I was on my way to meet you, to beg for your forgiveness, to try and fix what I broke. But life has a cruel way of ending things before they're finished. Take care of our babies. Love them with everything you have. And please, find a way to forgive me. Not for my sake, but for yours. You deserve peace, even if I couldn't give it to you in life. Forever yours, Molly. Tears streamed down my face as I read her words. The anger I'd held onto for so long cracked and crumbled, replaced by an unbearable ache. She had been on her way to me that night, ready to confess, to try and make things right. But fate had other plans. I clutched the letter to my chest, sobbing until my body shook. The closure I thought I'd wanted now felt like a cruel joke. I had my answers, but they brought no peace, only more questions, more pain. The weeks dragged on, and I fell into a routine of survival. Work, kids, sleep, or at least attempts at sleep. Most nights, I sat in the darkened living room, staring at the shadows on the wall, lost in thoughts of what could have been. One night, I heard a noise from upstairs. I rushed to check on Emma and Jack, but they were both sound asleep. As I turned to leave their room, I noticed something on Jack's nightstand, a small photo of Molly holding him as a baby, her smile radiant and full of love. I picked up the photo, my heart breaking all over again. For all her flaws, for all her mistakes, she had been a devoted mother. And now, I was all they had left. That realization hit me like a tidal wave. I wasn't enough. The next morning, I dropped the kids off at school and went back home. The house was suffocatingly quiet. Molly's letter sat on the kitchen counter, her words etched into my mind. The pain was too much. I couldn't carry it anymore. I wrote a short note, explaining to the kids that I loved them more than anything in the world but that I was too broken to go on. I asked my sister to take care of them, knowing she'd give them the love and stability I no longer could. I drove to the same bridge where Molly had lost her life. It felt poetic, in a twisted way, to end my pain where hers had ended. The wind was cold, biting against my skin as I stepped out of the car. The river below roared, a dark and endless void. I stood at the edge, the weight of my grief and guilt pushing me forward. But as I closed my eyes and prepared to take the final step, a voice pierced through the haze. "Dad?" I turned, my heart stopping at the sight of Emma and Jack standing there, their faces pale and frightened. My sister had driven them home early and seen my note. She had brought them to find me. "Please don't leave us," Emma sobbed, running toward me. "We need you." Jack clung to her, his small frame trembling. "We already lost Mom," he whispered. "Don't leave us too." I fell to my knees, pulling them into my arms as tears streamed down my face. Their love, their desperation, pulled me back from the brink. In that moment, I realized that while Molly's betrayal and death had broken me, it was my children who could save me. I had to live, not for myself, but for them. The tragedy didn't end that day, but it took a different shape. The pain of losing Molly never left me, and the scars of her betrayal lingered. But as I held my children close, I made a promise to them, and to myself. I would carry the pain, the guilt, the grief, and the love. I would carry it all. Because in the end, they were the only part of her I had left. And that was enough to keep me going.